For those of you in your 20s and 30s, you might have your parents coming up to you saying, you know what, you Gen Z and millennials, you have it much easier than we had back in the 1990s. Back then, it was much more challenging to buy a home, as interest rates were 15%. It was a lot tougher to be a homeowner. Well, part of that is true. Interest rates were 15%. That's pretty much 3 times what they are now in 2024. However, it is much harder for Gen Z and millennials, or practically anybody, to buy a house in today's market, despite interest rates being a third of what they were back then. In the 1980s and particularly the 1990s, interest rates were much higher, but homes were much more affordable. Let's see why. Back then, a home in the GTA, the Greater Toronto Area, was approximately $255,000, or $514,000 today, adjusting for inflation. That is expensive, but it is somewhat affordable. Consider that the average median income back then was about $59,000. So when a person bought a house, this was roughly 4 times their annual household income. That's not horrible. That is somewhat affordable and decent. Now, fast forward to today in 2024, and that same house costs $1.12 million. So that's roughly 4, almost 5 times what it did cost back then. However, the average median salary has only increased to $86,000. So salaries have increased only about 1.5 times as much as they were back then, but home prices have increased 4 to almost 5 times as much. So now the average home is no longer priced at 4 times a person's average net income. It is priced at 13 times a person's average income. House prices were higher back in the 1990s, but income ratios were more balanced, making essential items more affordable. Now, a greater portion of people's paychecks are going simply to pay for housing every month.
In Toronto, that's now 59%. In Calgary, 48%, 53% in Montreal. And Vancouver, a whopping 106% goes just towards paying for housing alone. So if we average that out all over the country, that works out to be about 64% of the median household income.
64% is very high, and the numbers aren't much better for condos, which sit at 46%, and detached homes at 70%.
The old rule of thumb in my day was you spend about 1/3 of your income on housing. Now you'll hear anecdotal evidence, particularly in places like Vancouver or Toronto, where you'll hear 70 to 75% of income is being spent on housing. So in those cases then, if they have to reset at a higher interest rate, it's the house that's going to go down first.
About 50% of Canadians are now living paycheck to paycheck, according to Sue Hutchison, president of Equifax. Canadians have felt the sting not just with housing, but also with rental units as well, as prices eventually trickle down to rental units, causing their prices to increase substantially. Toronto rents have risen 5 times faster than historical trends. And then there are stories about renters who spend 100% of their net income on rent alone. The gross salary of the average person varies from province to province. However, the challenge of home ownership has never been more difficult than it is right now in Canada. Living with your parents, living with your ex, giving up basic needs like food and clothing, these are just some of the sacrifices Canadians say they've been making to pay rent amid the surging prices and decreased availability marking Canada's rental housing crisis. In fact, Clear Value Tax, a great, very popular channel on YouTube that I watch myself, came out with a video about this very subject, talking about the American side. This is happening in America as well. However, in Canada, it's dialed up a lot higher than what our neighbors to the south are experiencing.
As Aaron is explaining, you'll see here, the lower on this chart, the more affordable a home becomes relative to income. Look at this enormous spike right at the start of 2020, with the costs increased from 37% in 2015 to over 60% in 2024. Also, you may have noticed a similar spike that happened in 1990, when interest rates also shot up. However, this was in the middle of a recession and was temporary, lasting only a quarter, coming down a year later back to around 46%.
Home prices versus household earnings. Here's a chart showing the average home price versus household earnings, the median household income. When we divide the average home price by the median household income over the years, this gives us the price to income ratio. The higher the ratio, the more difficult it is for the average household to be able to afford a house. This results in more stress on Canadian households and puts them more into the red regarding risk.
To quote NerdWallet, in the 40 years between 1980 and 2020, the average home price increased by about 746%, while the median household income rose by 295%. Employers resistant to wage increases have played a role in the discrepancy, but so have buyers willing to pay far more than a home's asking price.
Also, as a double whammy, due to the law of supply and demand, the scales have tipped drastically so that there is a lot less supply of affordable homes available and a lot more pent-up demand prospective buyers, primarily due to a huge increase in Canada's population over the last few years. Canada needs to build 170,000 new housing units every 3 months to keep up with the population growth, noting the industry is struggling to complete 220,000 units in a full year. The average annual housing starts have not kept up with population growth, particularly over the last 3 years.
What kind of a show are you guys putting on here today?
And on a side note, about 2/3 or maybe even 3/4 of Canadians are very dissatisfied with how Canada has been progressing over the last few years, and who can blame them? It seems like we've been slowly sliding downhill, primarily in housing and the cost of living.
Many people feel like the Canadian economy has gone to...
I thought it was chocolate yogurt for so long.
It will be very interesting to see what happens after the election. Trudeau making claims such as, well, Canada would have been in a far worse position if I were never even elected at all. Really? Are you sure? I don't think so. However, if you were to Google, how much should I spend on housing every month? You'll probably come across the 28-36 rule, meaning that no more than 28% of your gross monthly income should go towards housing. This includes all expenses, so insurance, property taxes, CMHC costs. Then in addition to that, you want to be sure that all of your expenses for the entire month never ever exceed 36% of your gross monthly income. This includes all your expenses, so think your car loan, your line of credit, your credit cards. All of your expenses should never exceed 36% of your gross monthly income. These principles were put in place so that a person can live below their means comfortably and not be stretched to the max and can actually afford the items they're buying. As you saw from that chart, the average median income to home price ratio is over 60%. We are way past the safe benchmark. Many people have been relying on debt to help them get by, whether it's buying groceries on a credit card or helping bridge the gap with their mortgage payments by using a line of credit. People are stretched to the max, and banks know this. This is why you're beginning to hear about mortgage defaults increasing. And banks also know this and are quietly setting aside millions of dollars, anticipating perhaps a dramatic downfall in mortgage delinquencies.
Just this quarter, Canada's big six banks have set $4.3 billion aside to cover bad loans. That's almost double what they set aside in the first quarter of last year and more than 11 times what they set aside in the first quarter before that.
Nobody knows how many Canadians might actually default on their loan. Usually Canadians are pretty stellar with their debt management. However, this is a crisis like we've never seen before. Many people had a little choice if they want to stay in their house, but to rely on debt and credit. These payment shocks that banks are anticipating will occur once people either can't continue to afford the home they purchased or experience payment shock. These payment shocks will occur as mortgages renew and people are thrust from what was probably a variable fixed rate mortgage of 1.5% way up to 4.5%. I actually called out this very thing from happening on my most popular video, The Canadian Housing Bubble Explained. Please check it out. Many people are either choosing to rent for the time being or to relocate from the outrageous prices in major centers like Toronto and Vancouver to moderately affordable cities like Edmonton, Calgary, and other prairie centers.
How would you characterize what prices look like today versus even just a few years ago?
Well, I mean, today in the Toronto area, prices are roughly 10 times median income. So it's difficult markets to get into. And I think it's one of the reasons why people are looking elsewhere.
Unfortunately, For the residents of those cities and provinces experiencing an increase in population growth due to people migrating from other provinces, this is driving up the cost of living in those cities. Calgary was very expensive before, but now the cost of living has skyrocketed, just like many other cities have in Canada.
The absolute cost of living in Alberta is quite high. Calgary and Edmonton are two of the 4 most expensive cities in all of Canada.
It's been a big change, especially in the housing market. Like before, you could probably find a house that was sitting on the market, and these days it's like a bidding war to get yourself in.
As interest rates go up, rents are going up, which I think is eating into everybody's cost of living, and I think the groceries just add on to that.
Other Canadians are simply choosing to leave Canada altogether in search of greener pastures, often due to the high cost of living.
More immigrants are moving away from Canada in recent years. And data from Statistics Canada shows 15% of immigrants leave Canada within 20 years of arriving. A 2023 report from the Conference Board of Canada found that issues with housing and everyday affordability have led to an onward emigration rate of more than 30% higher than historical averages.
So no wonder many people are sitting on the sidelines saying, I'm not going to buy a home right now. The market is just too uncertain, and I'm definitely not a buyer at that price.
For context, Toronto and Vancouver rank as number 8 and 9 as the most expensive cities in the world, right below Hong Kong, London, Tokyo, and San Francisco. And yet other websites rank Vancouver as second only to London as the most expensive city at $1,188 per square foot. It's more expensive to live in Vancouver than it is to live in New York City.
Now, there is some hope. Many people are betting that the Bank of Canada will eventually drop interest rates. However, if you're sitting on the sidelines waiting for the Bank of Canada to drop their interest rates so that maybe you can get into the market and afford a home, chances are many other people are as well. So if the Bank of Canada does drop interest rates, this will instantly cause a surge in demand. And keep in mind that both in Canada and the US, home prices are predicted to keep increasing. That's why we have very educated people working on this very complex problem.